Ethically Speaking is a podcast of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business.
Hello, and welcome to episode 16 of Ethically Speaking, a podcast from the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. The big news recently was the Equifax data systems hack, potentially exposing extremely confidential personal information on some 143 million Americans. This from a company that describes itself as, quote, trusted stewards of data, end quote. Equifax discovered the breach in late July, made a public announcement on September 7th, a couple of weeks after they patched the vulnerability. To help us understand a bit more what happened with this Equifax hack, I've invited Andrew Urbaczewski, the chair of the Department of Business Information and Analytics at the Daniels College of Business, to come and have a conversation. Andrew is not only the chair of the department, but he's also editor-in-chief of the Journal of Information Technology Cases and Applied Research. His early research examined electronic monitoring of internet usage by employers, and his current research focuses on mobile phone design and mobile commerce, as well as information security, education, and electronic health record implementation. So we have a genuine expert on information security to talk about this Equifax hack. Andrew, do you think that companies like Equifax and the other credit reporting operations have a very special responsibility to protect data that belongs to others, in spite of the fact that the others didn't really give that data to Equifax? My sense is that Equifax and the other reporting agencies have a much greater responsibility to protect that consumer data that they deal in than, say, Sony had in protecting their digital movie and email files.
The several credit reporting agencies that are out there have an interesting relationship with consumers. We know that when we deal with Facebook or with Google that, as the old saying goes, if you're not paying for anything, then you are the product. We don't deal with the credit reporting agencies in general, whether it's Equifax, Experian, or TRW. They somehow get our information as individuals from the companies that we actually do business with, and there's not a whole lot that we can do about this as consumers. That being said, ethically, I believe that they have a very important responsibility to maintain privacy and security of individuals' data, given that that's their whole business and they're obtaining their raw materials for their business without the permission of the individuals who own that raw material. That makes it extremely difficult for us as consumers to understand or to accept when there is some type of a security breach with a company that we've never done business with and wouldn't choose to do business with, as opposed to one that we might regularly do business with.
How would a company, or how should a company like Equifax and the other credit reporting bureaus, how should they carry out those responsibilities? Do they need to have a much higher and specialized set of skills in their technicians to do this, or is it simply a matter of pouring more money into it, or maybe just paying more attention? What's required to get them to that point?
Well, much like any business, they're going to do what the law requires them to do, and probably not much more beyond that, because anything that goes to cybersecurity for a business that does not deal directly with those customers, it's a cost center. It's not anything that's providing them any level of help with their brand when it's dealing with customers, and I'd rather use company A as my credit reporting provider instead of company B as my credit reporting provider. So unfortunately, we're going to rely on individuals in the legislative bodies who may not be that up on technology by itself to be the ones to tell these companies what to do when it comes to protecting our information. And they're just as likely to tell the companies to do something that is technically impossible as they are to tell them to do something that is not very difficult at all or not going to provide any real layer of security at all.
Andrew, that sounds to me like you may not believe that the people running these companies with what we think is a higher level of responsibility recognize that themselves. It's just another business.
That would be my belief at this point. Again, I have not talked or had dinner with any of the chief executive officers of any of these companies, and I'm certain that their public persona would be much different. But at this point, they're in business to make a profit, and it's all about revenues minus costs at this point. And any costs that go to protecting the data that they wouldn't have to do by law, or that they could just do and hope that nobody's poking around in their data, just looks bad at the quarterly shareholders meeting.
Yep. Okay. That helps me understand it. It appears, Andrew, that Equifax was warned of this vulnerability that was in fact due to a well-known, at least publicly well-known, software deficiency in other people using that software. They were warned of it in June, and the patch was available in June, the fix. But it wasn't until 2 months that they actually installed the patch. Why would it take so long?
Well, it's true that this was not a zero-day exploit that was being used. And again, if you're not familiar with the term zero-day exploit, that's when a hole exists in some piece of hardware or software that there is no patch available or that nobody else knows about. And these are things that our security agencies tend to use when they're trying to monitor targets of interest. In this case, yes, it was made available in June. Why did it take them so long to put it in? I'm not sure. You'd have to talk to Mr. Smith right now, who's busy telling a bunch of Congress people today why this wasn't put in so much more expediently. With software patches, what we do have to understand is that just because it's available doesn't mean that we can implement it right that second or right that minute. When a patch comes out within software, sometimes we put it in and it breaks something else. And any of you that own iPhones that last week upgraded to iOS 11, you may have noticed that while you've got all the new features of iOS 11, there's some program or some feature now that doesn't work because of that. And so companies, when they're applying patches, tend not to apply them the minute that they're available because they need to test the rest of their information technology environment to make sure that it's not going to cause something bad to happen. We've heard stories where whole cities have been without internet for days because a particular tier 1 internet provider tried to upgrade a router or upgrade some software and didn't realize everything else that it was going to break. This being said, as we talked about earlier, these companies are dealing with data that is not their own to begin with. Ethically, they have a responsibility to apply these patches just as soon as possible. It may be that they need to have more information technology resources to do more of this testing much more quickly than perhaps the company down the road, because we know that what they have in terms of personal information, and this time we know 145 million Americans, is a gold mine for anybody that's wanting to be able to impersonate somebody else, steal their identity, obtain credit, or anything else that they might like to do with that information.
If you put a little timeline together, they were warned in June. They installed the patch in late July when they discovered the hack. Didn't report that to the public or anybody else until the 7th of September. Just seems to me that this just wasn't considered a serious issue for them.
The optics certainly are not good on this, and particularly when there's still some investigation going on as to whether or not there may have been some sales of securities by the leadership within Equifax that perhaps they knew something was going to happen and they were cashing out while it was good. Of course, this is all alleged right now. It certainly doesn't look good that some of these actions took place and that they would have taken that long. It is not uncommon for a company to wait to disclose a vulnerability until they can make sure that they've patched all of the holes. Waiting 2 months is a bit of a stretch.
Well, as soon as I read about this, and I got a little concerned myself, so I went on these websites to freeze my reports.
Sure.
And the Equifax website looked much more like a sales document than a repair document.
I think a lot of what they're getting in trouble for now, much like we talk about Watergate, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up, is the way that this was handled by Equifax. And when they created their own special website and told people when they went to it, I went to it myself, and they told me come back in 9 days or 10 days that then I would actually be able to file for protection. If you actually went through and read some of the user agreements that they had with it that would really limit the rights of individuals if they applied for this particular bit of credit protection that they were offering, it really, really doesn't look good. And Equifax really, really should have had better preparation for communications for these types of information release disasters, given that their whole business is built upon information.
It's going to be very interesting, at least to me, to watch this thing unfold, not only through the congressional hearings and things that are going on, but there are criminal charges being laid now as well. So the Justice Department is involved. The board's going to be under increasing pressure, and they're already talking about clawbacks, and it's going to be an interesting thing to watch.
Well, we never saw the industry change within chief financial officers' offices and within accounting documents until Sarbanes-Oxley came out and made people criminally liable once they signed the documents rather than just civilly liable.
Yeah.
Writing a check is one thing. Spending some time in the federal hotel is a little different.
Right. In the news reports on the Equifax situation, Andrew, it appears the person in charge of information technology security reported up to the chief legal officer, a fellow named John Kelly. Now, John Kelly was also responsible for a number of other functions, including government and legislative matters, corporate governance, privacy functions, as well, of course, running the entire Equifax legal staff. Having this very technology security function buried in this organization of lawyers and legislative representatives and so on, seems like they're not paying very much attention to it. It doesn't have a clean line to anybody with technical knowledge, expertise, nor the resources.
You're right, and I think that really goes to show the relative levels of value that are placed on things like cybersecurity, that it's viewed as a cost center while they're there, and while of course there are some regulatory compliance issues that are associated with it and probably made Equifax think when they're putting their corporate structure together that it belongs well within the legal department. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon even in businesses that are not in the regulated space. We were having this podcast 20 years ago, we would be talking about the chief information officer, which had never really existed before the 1980s, and should the CIO have a seat at the board table? And in some companies it did, and mostly now that they don't, they tend to report to chief financial officers, in some cases chief operations officers, and below that function, even of the CIO, would be your CISO, the chief information security officer. So unfortunately, it's not surprising that it is a couple of layers down. This being said, within a company that is only dealing with individuals' information and their only real asset is that information on those 145 million Americans, one would think that the protection of it might garner a little higher seat within their corporate structure.
Let me read you a quote from one of the New York Times articles on this over the past several weeks. This is what the reporter wrote. Equifax put the chief legal officer in charge of cybersecurity so that the chief security officer would report to an unbiased executive, someone who didn't have to choose between IT and cybersecurity when allocating money according to the same person. That is his source, the reporter's source. You buy that?
It's a great story on the back end, for sure, and maybe it's a matter of finding the facts that you like to fit the outcome that has happened. If it were true, if it is true, certainly one of the big lessons learned that's going to come out of this is, should this really be buried somewhere in a legal office, or should this be part of our board-level conversations?
I've spent 35 years, I had spent 35 years in the business world, and I've never heard of any kind of a rationale for a reporting relationship like that. So I remain to be convinced.
I understand.
So we recall several years ago when Yahoo discovered a hack of their systems, which they estimated to be affecting 1 billion accounts, and that was in 2013. Just the other day, it was in fact on a front page headline in the Wall Street Journal that Yahoo's 2013 attack is now estimated at 3 billion accounts rather than a comparatively small 1 billion accounts. And this comes after, the big Sony hack several years ago and the Equifax thing. Do you think American corporations are taking this thing as seriously as they ought to?
I wish that I could say that they definitely are. As consumers now, we see that there's another hack, and it's almost not even news anymore. It's almost we expected. I mean, it's a shame that we saw this tragedy in Las Vegas this past weekend, and it's almost like, gee, there's another mass shooting. What's really going to be done to change all of these bad things that are going on within information technology and security? And we often have the problem with security of it's an escalating issue, that we can fix one door and then somebody comes in through the window, and then we bar the window and then somebody comes in through the roof, and so on and so forth, that the people that are the good guys, the defenders, have to constantly be defending all of the ports, all of the weaknesses, all of the times, whereas the bad guys only have to find one weakness one time, and they can be able to extract the information that comes from that. Unfortunately, as these things become more and more common, I think that companies are feeling like we have to take care of the PR issues that happen in the first 48 hours, but anymore it seems like, okay, we're admitting we had a hack, here's a year's worth of credit protection for the people that got hacked, and next order of business tomorrow. What will it take to really be able to change this? I'm not sure. Again, maybe it comes out of Congress or some other legislative body. Maybe we wind up changing this technologically to where we no longer have one social security number that defines us for the rest of our life, but we have rotating numbers, just like we have rotating passwords, and having it so that if some of our information is compromised, maybe it's good for a week or a month or a year, but then beyond that wouldn't be of use to anybody at all.
The way I view what appears to be the attitude of the Equifax CEO, former CEO, it reminds me of the statement Matthias Mueller, the new CEO of Volkswagen, made at the Detroit Auto Show when a reporter asked him something about this ethical breach. And he said, with his wonderful German accent on his English, of course, he said, ethics, this was simply a technical issue. There's no ethics issue. and what appears to me here is that Mr. Smith, former CEO of Equifax, is not seeing any more responsibility to protect this data more carefully. It's simply a technical issue.
He's right that it is a technical issue. It's a very difficult technical issue, but yet the unique space that they occupy within the economy requires them to be far more vigilant than your average company or certainly your average person with the information. Again, that information is their only asset, and that's the only reason that anybody winds up doing any business with them. And the ways that they obtain that information are certainly not directly from the people that provide it. So if you're going to get into that business, you have accepted a unique responsibility much greater than that of any other company that's out there to be diligent and protect those assets. And when you are not putting all of your focus into protecting those particular assets and you're waiting a couple of months until patches wind up getting applied and then approved and then disclosed, one then has to wonder, does this cross the line from being a technical issue to an ethical issue? And certainly to myself, I would say yes, it's very much an ethical issue.
Well, good to close a podcast on vehement agreement.
Ethically Speaking is a podcast of the Institute for Enterprise Ethics at the Daniels College of Business. College of Business. College of Business.